Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a little DFS and prop preview for tomorrow's special Saturday slate. We've got 3 games to choose from. Not really the best matchups, but still a slate that needs taken down from the DFS side and a few props. We can go out there and attack for some value as well. So here in this video, going to take a look at the DFS side of things, bring you a few different strategies or a few different ways to think about tomorrow's slate to go out there and build your lineups. And then afterwards, we'll hop into the underdog side of things and go over a slip on that end that brings quite a bit of value over there from that angle. So a lot to get into here. Let's go ahead and get this thing rolling. To simplify things over here for DFS, there's going to be 2 stacks that we're looking at, which I think is a really good way to look at these 3 game slates. So as I've mentioned in the past, maybe you're new to this kind of format, you have to build a lineup like you would for a main slate, right? You've got, 3 wide receivers to fill, you got a flex, 2 running backs to fill up there, a lot of salary to spend, and a lot of different spots to get to. And a lot of times when people are playing this kind of slate, you see it a lot more prominently out there for the main slate. People will, disregard correlation. They'll go out there, try and find individual spots that spike in any given matchup. But when you only have 3 games to choose from, it's a lot harder to find, 9 individual plays that are going to go out there and spike that ceiling performance. What you find in some of these slates instead is that a lot of times the, top finishers, especially in like smaller field stuff, are lineups that go out there and stack an individual game. So rather than thinking about this like you would for a main slate where maybe you take, a quarterback, pair him up with like a wide receiver from the same team, maybe a little buyback action on the other side, you actually want to be a little bit more correlated for these smaller slates. So a few stacks that we want to point out here is, first off, we got Russell Wilson going against that Detroit defense, which can be a little bit shoddy at times. And then later on, we'll talk a little bit about the Nick Mullins stack going against the Cincinnati Bengals. So we'll start with Russell Wilson first, who is going to be your highest owned quarterback on the slate. On here, guys, you can see my current projections, both in terms of points and ownership on here. Of course, these will update throughout the week, so my Patreons are getting constant updates over here, as well as everything that is blacked out on the sheet. So you've been wondering, right, where you can get all my content that I offer. It is all posted on the Patreon uncensored. But as of right now, your highest owned quarterback is also the one that I think has the most upside. A lot of that is because of the matchup. You have the highest total there in that Detroit versus Denver game. And on top of that, you have a really soft secondary for the Lions. Now, they could be getting CJ Gardner-Johnson back as soon as this game tomorrow. But in the absence of CJ Gardner-Johnson, they have been absolutely torched. I mean, that's why they've lost a bunch of games over this last month. And though Gardner-Johnson would be a huge influx out there, he's also only one player, right? And he's a player that's going to be playing dinged up if he's out there, if anything. So Russell Wilson has that going for him, right? A solid matchup out there. And on top of that, he's have a willing dance partner, right? On the other side of things, it's just where the correlation comes in here. You have an extremely potent offense in the Detroit Lions. So not only can we go out there, right, try and get some correlation with maybe a Wilson, Judy, and Son, maybe you throw in a Samaje Perine for a third down back out there, but you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, both running backs for Detroit, right, Gibbs and Montgomery. You've got players like Laporta out there, I mean, even Josh Reynolds that can go out there and break a slate that are all valuable buybacks. So rather than going out there and maybe taking a quarterback, a wide receiver, and maybe one buyback, I would implore you to be a little bit more aggressive about it, right? Maybe you take somebody like a Russell Wilson, you throw in 2 pass catchers, maybe even a running back out there for the Broncos, and you run it back with 2 wide receivers from the Detroit Lions. All that has to happen for that kind of lineup to get there, and right, maybe it's the Jared Goff-led version that gets there too, right? Where you use Goff rather than a Russell Wilson. All that has to happen for a huge game stack to hit is for that game to score 15, maybe 20 points in the other few games. Now, that's still asking quite a bit, but that's all that has to happen for one game to be that much more important than the rest. So rather than going out there and just taking the best plays, right, hitting optimize out there in your optimizers, try and set some rules, right? When you're playing a Russell Wilson, make sure you're taking at least 2 players from the team, and maybe rather than just a 1 player for a buyback, you make it 2 for this kind of slate. So we'll look through some of the different buyback options, some of the different stacking options that you can get to here, right? We talked about the Detroit running backs. They're a little bit expensive, but they project pretty well. There with Montgomery at 24% ownership. You've got Jahmyr Gibbs at the top of the pricing at 35% ownership. So you're not really going to get that much different there, but at wide receiver and tight end, you've got options, right? You've got spots where you can get that leverage. So we'll start there, right? We'll start with the leverage. You have Mims down here, Marvin Mims, who I am playing this week. I know it's blacked out over here, but he's only there at 6.4% ownership. If you go over here to Samaje Perine, right? I mentioned him as a potential third down back. He's 2.1% owned. We go over here to tight end. Adam Troutman is 3% owned at that position. You have chalky pieces, right? Like a Sam Laporta, right? He could use as a buyback out there. But as long as you're mixing in one of those sub 5% owned players, that's how you get the differentiation you're looking for. On top of that, we can leave salary on the table. We can go out there, spend up at a few tight end positions, maybe even take a tight end at the flex spot. And that's a different way to go out there and get yourself different too. So there are plenty of ways to differentiate this chalky Russell Wilson stack. Just don't go out there, play Russell Wilson with like Judy and Cortland Sutton. Don't make your buybacks like Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta, right? You've got to get different at one spot, right? And it's a 3-game slate, right? We're going to have that random player go out there and break the slate. Just make sure in all of your lineups that you're mixing in one, probably at least 2 of those kind of players to try and embrace that volatility. The other stack I want to bring your attention to is this Nick Mullins stack. So Nick Mullins is only $5,000. You've got that salary component working for you. I have to say the salary is pretty, just the pricing in general is extremely soft out here for this slate, but it does help, right, to be able to save a little bit of salary at the quarterback spot. And the main reason I like Nick Mullins is not because of his talent level, right? His points per dollar rate is 3.16. That's the best of all the quarterbacks, but it's because of the weapons around him, right? You've got Justin Jefferson, who should be a little bit healthier this time around. Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, even Ty Chandler has been pretty damn good out there for the Vikings. You've got a lot of stud options at the skill positions that could carry this offense, right? Maybe it's a little screen pass to Justin Jefferson that he takes for a 70-yard touchdown. Even Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, Brandon Power, all relatively productive players. Maybe it's not Nick Mullins that goes out there and breaks the slate. Maybe it's all the guys that you play with him that get a Nick Mullins to the optimal. So I like the game environment here. Have to say the Cincinnati defense has been pretty shoddy in general. So I do expect the Vikings to score a little bit more points than they were able to against the Raiders. And sure, right, they only scored 3 points against the Raiders. What do the Raiders do next time out? Score 63 points, right? So we don't really want to hold these performances against teams all that much, especially when they have the Justin Jeffersons, Addisons, Hawkinsons of the world out there. They have the kind of skill needed to go out there and get that bounce back. So if we look at the ownership, Jefferson's owned, right? But he's actually one of the lower owned players up there at the top. But if you're looking for differentiation, right? KJ Osborne, a real quick way to get different. You're not going to get different with like a Tanner Hudson, right? He's 11.2%. But if you go to a Irv Smith, a Drew Sample, or a Mitchell Wilcox, they're all sub 0.5% owned and all going to play snaps. They play in upwards of 25 to 35% of snaps out there for the Bengals. They use 2 tight end sets more than any other team in the league. And especially like Drew Sample, like he'll play a solid 40-50% of snaps, maybe not as productive as a Tanner Hudson when he plays, but any of these guys could get there. Even a Mitchell Wilcox, right? He doesn't play as much as Irv Smith or a Drew Sample, for example, but still like a 20-25% snap rate, that's all you need to get there. So once again, he's much lower owned than what we have with Russell Wilson. You have the Justin Jeffersons that, aren't that chalky up there at that kind of price tag. All you have to do is mix in one of these lower owned plays, right? One of the guys that's probably sub 5% on the slate, and you're going to be different enough, especially if you're leaving that salary on the table. So that would be my advice for the slate, right? Is try and go out there, find a game environment that you think could go out there and be a shootout and attack it, right? For me, that Russell Wilson versus Jared Goff, that one's a little bit more straightforward, right? That's also why it's a little bit more chalky. It's the highest total on the slate. This Jake Browning, Nick Mullins matchup doesn't look great on paper, but on the other side of things, right, we talked about all the Viking skill position players, right? You've got all the different skill position players out there for Cincy, and you've seen Jake Browning take advantage of it, right? So in terms of buybacks, you've got Jamar Chase, you've got guys like a Joe Mixon out there, Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Hudson, all of those different tight ends that I think, right, even with 2 shitty, inexperienced younger quarterbacks, could throw up some points, right? I'm not saying they're going to score a million points out there, but I have a lot more confidence, right, in those two games being shootouts than Gardner Minshew versus Mitch Trubisky. I mean, first off, you have pretty solid defenses in that game. The skill position players aren't nearly as, top level as you have in some of the other games, right? No Jonathan Taylor, right? No Kenny Pickett out there for the Steelers. Mitch Trubisky is, as a Steeler fan, one of the worst quarterbacks in all the NFL, period, right? Whether they're a starter or a backup. I just would rather get to these other two game environments. So that's the way that I'm attacking this slate. And for my defenses, right, I don't hate the Colts. I don't hate the Steelers, right? I'm out there, but if I'm expecting that game to be a little bit more ugly. So that's how I would attack the slate. Maybe attack the correlation a little bit more than you would for most slates. And that's how you can go out there and grind out some profit for a 3-game slate like this. All right, and now for our prop exposure. So 2 props I'm taking over here, an Underdog. Nothing on Prize Picks this time, just not a ton of value I see as of right now. But these 2 props over here, an Underdog, I not only took for this exposure, but I also went over and bet them on Hard Rock Bet for straight bets. So let's hop on into it. First off, this Jamar Chase over. So Minnesota defense has actually been a lot better against the run than most would give them credit for. And Jamar Chase at minus 130 odds on DraftKings is also a decent value compared to the sports books. He's an elite tier player. Jake Browning and him have had a pretty decent connection in terms of their chemistry over this last month. He's seen plenty of targets in pretty much every single game, and it's gone over this mark against much tougher defenses. So, Jake Browning, right, you don't feel that great about him going out there and playing, but they've put up decent numbers. I don't want to call them amazing numbers, right, over the last 3-4 weeks, but solid enough that this is a solid value to take an over on. So you got the sportsbook value, the decently soft matchup, and the pedigree, the consistency over the last 3-4 events, which is why I like taking this over on Chase. It was minus 115 on Hard Rock Bet. So, obviously in comparison to the minus 130 odds on DraftKings, I believe it's at 65.5 yards on FanDuel. A little bit of value that you're squeezing there too. And then we have this David Montgomery over. And for as good as the Denver defense has been against the pass, they've been equally as shitty against the run. They're allowing over 125 yards per game to opposing running backs. You do have the 2 guys out there, right? You got Gibbs and Montgomery to feed, but both of them should see upwards of 12 to maybe even 15 carries. And with 12 to 15 carries, a team in the Broncos that also lets up over 5.2 yards per carry, if we're going to give Montgomery those 14 carries, right, that's projecting for well over 70 yards. And in fact, if you look at his numbers over there on FanDuel, he's at 69.5 yards. So minus 130 on DraftKings, you got the 69.5 number on FanDuel. Super soft matchup. Another prop that I took not only over here on Underdog, but I also mixed him in over there on Hard Rock Bet. So a couple props I like getting exposure to here early, but of course I'll be hawking that board throughout the weekend. So if you want access to all the different props that I'm going to be playing, make sure to check out the Patreon page. On there, I'm posting all the different exposure that I'm getting to as soon as I'm getting to it, so you can try and get it before anything bumps. Heck, maybe even these 2 picks might even bump here at some point there at those minus 130 odds. So if you want exposure, if you want to get it as soon as I'm dropping it, make sure to check out the Patreon page. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the breakdown tomorrow. We'll be doing a video going over the main slate, so keep an eye out for that dropping on Saturday. And best of luck with all of your exposure here for the 3-gamer, whether it's for DFS, whether it's for props. Go out there, take home some profit for you guys, and let's get this weekend started with a bang. I appreciate the support here. Go ahead, smash that like button on the way out of here. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of that content when it drops. Like I said, main slate content tomorrow. We'll also have a Monday Night Football video I'm dropping sometime there on Monday morning. Go out there, get you guys prepared for all the given slates. I appreciate the support here. Like I said, whether you're liking, subscribing, or of course, if you're subscribing to the Patreon to get all of that behind the scenes coverage.